Hello there and welcome. Tonight you're about to step into a world of sand, sweat and wooden swords, the peculiar, perilous and surprisingly absurd life of a Roman gladiator. You'll meet eccentric trainers, grumpy veterans, philosophical Greeks and even a few misbehaving senators, all while navigating an arena that rewards courage, endurance and just a hint of luck. But before we get going, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more. Drop a comment below too, and let me know how long you think you would have made it in the gladiator lifestyle. Now sit back, relax, and let yourself be carried through the chaos, comedy, and unexpected wisdom of surviving ancient Rome, without ever needing to swing a sword yourself. You wake to the gentle sound of dripping water, the sort of rhythmic, echoing drip that might be soothing in another life, perhaps in a bathhouse or beside a peaceful fountain. Here, however, it merely suggests that something above you is leaking, possibly on purpose. The air is thick, warm, and smells faintly of olive oil, old stone, and mild despair. You are lying on a bed of straw, though bed may be a charitable term. It's more of a loosely organized conspiracy of sharp stalks, each of which appears to have personal ambitions of poking you in the kidney. The blanket tossed over you offers texture rather than comfort, coarse, scratchy, and faintly damp, with a smell that's somewhere between a wet sheep and an old sock. You blink, waiting for your eyes to adjust to the murky light filtering through a slit of a window high above. Dust hangs in the sunbeam like lazy ghosts. The cell is small and unapologetically functional. A rectangle of stone walls, a small clay bowl in the corner, a chain near the door, whose presence you decide not to investigate too closely. Everything about the space has been designed by someone deeply committed to the idea that comfort breeds weakness. It takes a few sluggish moments for your brain to locate itself inside your skull. There's a dull ache at the back of your head and an odd soreness in your shoulders, as if you spent the night arm wrestling with bad decisions. You try to recall how you got here, which proves difficult, as your most recent memories seem to be floating around your head like disorganized pigeons. There was wine, certainly. There's always wine. A loud man with too many teeth, perhaps? A contract of some kind, or at least something that felt like a contract? Someone said something about honor and opportunity, and possibly fame, which in hindsight should have been your cue to run in the opposite direction. Somewhere down the corridor, a door slams, and a voice bellows something in Latin that you're fairly sure involves the word move. There's the faint jingle of chains, the scuff of sandals on stone, and a general sense that the morning's activities have begun without your consent. You swing your legs over the side of the straw pile and immediately regret it. The floor is cold, and stone cold naturally, and your feet protest violently. You stretch, groaning in the quiet, and catch sight of yourself reflected faintly in a small metal bowl of water on the ground. You look alive, technically. A bit dusty, a bit bruised, with hair that seems to have given up organizing itself. The door to your cell swings open with the elegance of a collapsing cart, and a man fills the doorway. He is enormous in that uniquely Roman way, broad, scarred, and constructed entirely of sinew and scowl. His tunic might once have been white, but it has since faded to a color that can only be described as experienced. He carries a whip not as a threat, but as a lifestyle accessory, and the expression on his face suggests that he has very little time for nonsense, which is unfortunate, because nonsense appears to be your primary currency. Up, he grunts, as though the very concept of speech offends him. You open your mouth to reply, but the sound that comes out is somewhere between a croak and a confused vowel. The man sighs. Training starts when the sun's up, he says. You're late, again. You blink, wondering how you could be late for anything when you only just discovered your own existence. Right, you manage, because it feels important to say something, even if it's completely unhelpful. The man jerks his head toward the corridor. Come, the lanista wants to see what sort of mistake you are. The word lanista rings a faint bell in your mind, though it takes a moment for the meaning to shuffle forward. Trainer, gladiator trainer. You stare at him for a moment too long, hoping he's joking. He is not joking. You realize with a creeping sense of absurdity that you appear to have become a Roman gladiator. You consider protesting, perhaps pointing out that you have very little experience with armed combat, outside of occasionally wrestling with a stubborn wine cork, but the man's expression does not invite discussion. So you rise, brushing stray straw from your tunic, which you now notice is not yours, and follow him out into the corridor. The hallway is narrow and dimly lit, the stone cool underfoot. Other doors line the passage, some open, revealing men, in varying states of readiness, stretching, grumbling, polishing bits of armor that seem far too optimistic for this environment. One man, built like an ox and covered in more scars than skin, gives you a nod that could either mean good morning or I'll eat you later. It's difficult to tell. You emerge into the open courtyard, blinking against the sudden flood of sunlight. The space is large and rectangular, enclosed by high stone walls, and filled with the sound of wooden swords thudding against shields, trainers shouting orders, and men grunting in the universal language of physical suffering. Sand covers the ground, a golden sea that clings to everything and instantly infiltrates your sandals. You make a mental note that sand will be your eternal companion now, in your shoes, your bed, your hair, your soul. Around the edges of the yard, racks of training weapons lean against the walls. Wooden swords, staves, shields, and a small collection of helmets that look like rejected kitchenware. A few men spar in the center of the pit, moving with surprising grace for people whose lives depend on being hit artistically. Others sit on stone benches, sharpening blades, murmuring or staring into the distance, with the haunted tranquility of men who've accepted that their health plan is mostly theoretical. Your guide, the man with the whip, stops before a figure standing near the edge of the courtyard. This new man is smaller but somehow more dangerous, the way a coiled spring might be smaller than a bear trap. He wears a short tunic of fine linen and a leather belt studded with bits of bronze. His eyes are sharp and calculating, and his smile is one of those expressions that technically qualifies as a smile, but feels more like paperwork. "This is him," says your escort, with all the enthusiasm of someone introducing a particularly underwhelming loaf of bread. The smaller man looks you over head to toe, then back to the head again, as if hoping the view might improve the second time. "This," he says, "is the new one?" You feel compelled to say something, perhaps to clarify the situation, but before you can, he waves a dismissive hand. "Fine. Put him with the novicii. See if he lasts the week." The man with the whip grunts, gestures for you to follow, and you're ushered toward a group of trainees gathered near a line of water jars. They are an eclectic mix, tall, short, broad, wiry, united by an air of weary acceptance. One of them, a cheerful-looking Gaul with hair like dry straw and a grin that suggests he's been punched professionally for several years, claps you on the shoulder. "New meat," he says in Latin, but slowly, as if speaking to someone he assumes has recently been concussed. "Welcome, don't die too quickly." You thank him, because politeness seems important. He laughs, slapping your back with enough force to rearrange your lungs. "That's the spirit. You'll fit right in." The rest of the morning passes in a blur of shouting, dust, and indignity. You're handed a wooden sword, lighter than it looks, though you suspect that's because it's hollowed out to leave room for your disappointment. You're shown how to stand, how to hold the blade, how to swing, and how to fall gracefully, the last of which you immediately excel at. The sun climbs higher, baking the courtyard until the air itself feels heavy. You find yourself sweating in places you didn't know you possessed. The sand clings to your skin, the wooden sword bruises your palms, and every muscle in your body begins to file formal complaints. From time to time, the lanista wanders past, observing the trainees with a gaze sharp enough to pierce armor. When his eyes land on you, he sighs, mutters something about lost causes, and moves on. This, you decide, is progress. During a brief pause in training, you catch sight of a group of spectators watching from a shaded balcony. Men in clean togas lounging with cups of watered wine. They talk casually, laugh occasionally, and gesture toward the trainees as though discussing livestock. You have the distinct impression that you are one of the topics. One of the men points toward you and raises an eyebrow. Another shrugs in a way that says, perhaps he'll be useful for something decorative. You pretend not to notice. By midday, your limbs are trembling, your throat is dry, and you've developed a deep philosophical hatred of sand. The Gaul, Brutus, for of course his name is Brutus, hands you a small clay cup of water and grins. First day is the hardest, he says. Then you stop caring. You drink, half choking, and nod. How long have you been here, you ask? He thinks for a moment. 3 years or 4. Time blurs when every day involves screaming. You thank him again, because that's what one does when faced with terrifying honesty. When training finally ends, you're herded back through the corridor, your body a symphony of aches. The lanista calls out orders, assigns chores, and reminds everyone that tomorrow's schedule will be more interesting. You decide that in Rome, interesting is a deeply sinister word. Back in your cell, you collapse onto the straw and stare up at the ceiling, which is mostly cracks and shadows. You think about what you've learned today, that swords are heavier than they look, that sand is eternal, and that optimism is perhaps a luxury for people with fewer bruises. Somewhere beyond the walls you hear faint cheering, maybe from another training yard, maybe from the Colosseum itself. The sound rolls through the air like distant thunder, a reminder of what this place is preparing you for. You exhale slowly. You are, against all odds, a Roman gladiator. Not a particularly good one yet, but technically. The paperwork would confirm it. And as absurd as the situation may be, you find a small, flickering resolve forming somewhere beneath the exhaustion. You might not be brave, strong, or even remotely qualified, but you're here now. And if nothing else, you'd like to see how the week goes before committing to anything permanent. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the day settle over you. Outside, the dripping water continues its slow rhythm, steady and patient. Tomorrow will come soon enough. For now, you decide, you'll simply focus on survival. One breath, one bruise, one splintered wooden sword at a time. You are herded, somewhat against your will and entirely against your better judgment, into the training courtyard. The guards behind you use the universal language of prodding to indicate the direction they'd like you to walk, and you obey because you are both polite and unarmed. The air outside is dry and bright, and the sun seems determined to personally supervise your suffering. Before you stretches the ludus, the gladiator training ground. To call it welcoming would be an act of creative optimism. It's a large sandy yard surrounded by high walls that suggest escape is not so much discouraged as it is mathematically impossible. The ground is uneven. The smell is a blend of sweat, oil, and despair, and the soundtrack consists mostly of men grunting, wood clacking, and someone in the distance yelling, "Medic!" with increasing urgency. You scan the scene, hoping to identify your new comrades, or at least someone who looks less likely to stab you by accident. What you find is a spectrum of misery. To your left, a group of sunburned veterans move with weary efficiency, their muscles gleaming with the sort of definition that can only be achieved through years of forced labor and poor nutrition. They glance at you briefly, the way one might glance at a sack of grain, not with curiosity but calculation. To your right, the recruits. They stand in a loose cluster, fidgeting nervously and trying not to make eye contact with anything. They have the pale, startled look of people who thought gladiator was a metaphor. One of them is wearing what appears to be a cooking pot on his head, possibly as a makeshift helmet or perhaps just as a life choice. It's hard to tell. He catches you looking, taps the pot twice with his fist as if to say, "It's practical," and then immediately walks into a post. In the center of this tragic little world stands your lanista, the trainer, owner, and chief tormentor of the establishment. He's a tall man with the build of someone who eats disappointment for breakfast and washes it down with olive oil. His tunic is spotless. His expression is not. He regards you all with the professional disinterest of a tax auditor reviewing a particularly unpromising set of accounts. "Welcome," he says, the word landing on the ground with a thud. His tone makes it clear that this is not so much a greeting as it is a diagnosis. You are now property of the Ludus Magnus, Rome's finest training school for those who would prefer not to live long. The recruits exchange nervous glances. One coughs. The lanista continues. You will eat when told, sleep when told, and fight when told. Some of you will become champions. The rest of you... He pauses just long enough for the tension to ripen. will provide valuable learning experiences for the others. He gestures, and an assistant appears with a cart piled high with equipment, if one can call it that. You are handed your new gear, a wooden sword that looks like it's been chewed on by history itself, and a helmet that smells suspiciously of cheese. You try to adjust it, but the strap is designed for a head roughly the size and shape of a grape. You decide to wear it loosely, like a person who wants to look prepared but not committed. The lanista prowls between you, correcting stances, barking orders, and generally radiating menace. "Grip the sword with both hands," he shouts. "Pretend you mean it." "No, not like that. You're not stirring soup." Someone inevitably drops their sword. Someone else gets hit in the shin. A small fight breaks out, which the veterans watch with the mild interest of men observing a thunderstorm from a dry porch. The cooking pot man is struck almost immediately and falls to the ground, the pot ringing like a gong. "Excellent," says the lanista. "See, already providing value." After an indeterminate amount of sweating, shouting, and questioning your life choices, training pauses for a meal. The food is a stew of beans, barley, and unidentifiable floating objects. It is served lukewarm, presumably as a safety measure. You are told it's good for building strength, though you suspect it's mainly designed to test your will to live. You sit on a bench beside a particularly large man with a beard that could house a small family of sparrows. He looks at you with the easy confidence of someone who has seen dozens of people like you and buried half of them. "First day?" he asks, voice gravelly but not unkind. You nod, too tired to lie. "Brutus," he says, extending a hand the size of a small ham. You shake it out of reflex and immediately regret it. "I'm your bunkmate. Don't snore, don't steal my bread, and we'll get along fine." You introduce yourself, which seems to amuse him. "Ah," he says, smiling, "you've still got a name. Give it a week. They'll start calling you by something more useful, like Lefty or the Screamer." He laughs at his own joke and slaps you on the back hard enough to realign several vertebrae. You smile weakly, wondering whether this is friendliness or the early stages of assault. Brutus leans back, stretching his arms. "Don't worry too much," he says. "The first few weeks are the hardest. After that, you just sort of accept it." "Accept what?" You ask. "That you'll probably die," he replies cheerfully, taking another spoonful of stew. "But not today. Probably." He grins at you, and somehow you find it almost reassuring. There's something infectious about his calm acceptance of chaos, like a man who's made peace with the universe and intends to take it down with him. The afternoon drifts on in a haze of exertion and sunburn. The lanista introduces you to the various training stations, the wooden posts used for sword drills, the sand pits for wrestling, and the medical corner, which consists of a bucket, a cloth, and a man who looks tired of optimism. By sunset, your arms ache, your legs feel like boiled noodles, and you have sand in places that defy explanation. You are herded back to the sleeping quarters, a long, low room filled with rows of narrow cots. It smells faintly of men, mildew, and distant dreams. Brutus claims the cot beside yours with a sigh. "Home sweet home," he says, stretching out. "You'll get used to it, or you won't. Either way, it doesn't matter." You lie back staring at the ceiling, a masterpiece of cracks and cobwebs, and listen to the sounds of the ludus winding down for the night. The distant clang of weapons being put away, the murmur of men recounting near misses, the occasional scream of someone discovering they have a new splinter. Somewhere in the dark, the lanista's voice echoes faintly, barking at some poor soul who dared to yawn too loudly. You close your eyes and wonder how it is that through a series of administrative missteps and terrible judgment, you've ended up as Rome's newest unwilling athlete. Still, you tell yourself, there are worse fates. You could be out there fighting wild beasts, or in the Senate pretending to understand tax law. Here at least things are simple. You train, you fight, you survive, hopefully in that order. As you drift into an uneasy rest, Brutus mutters something in the dark. "Oh, you'll do fine," he says. "Just remember that don't volunteer for anything." You mumble agreement, though you have no idea what he's referring to. Then again, in a place like this, ignorance might be the only thing keeping you calm. You lie still, the smell of oil lamps and sweat thick in the air, and let the absurdity of your situation sink in. Somehow, despite the exhaustion, despite the soreness, and despite the faint suspicion that tomorrow will be worse, you find yourself smiling, because really, and how bad could it be? Morning arrives at the ludus with all the tenderness of a tax audit. You wake to the sound of a horn being blown by someone who clearly enjoys their work far too much. It's a deep, mournful note that seems to vibrate your skull, as though the universe itself is sighing. Around you, the dormitory erupts into motion, groans, coughs, and the symphony of men realizing that sleeping on straw does not, in fact, get easier with time. Brutus rolls off his cot beside you, landing on his feet with the practiced grace of a man who's done this for years. "Up you get," he says, clapping his hands. "The Lanista says training makes champions. I say it just sorts out who can stay conscious the longest." You sit up slowly, every muscle lodging a formal complaint. Your shoulders ache, your arms feel like someone replaced them with damp laundry, and your legs seem to have forgotten what upright means. You rub your eyes, briefly consider pretending to be dead, and then remember that faking your own death probably requires more acting, skill than you currently possess. Breakfast is served outside, a bowl of barley porridge so dense it could double as construction material. You eat it in silence with the others, while a crow on the wall watches you with unearned confidence. Brutus nudges you. Don't let him fool you. He's seen things. He knows which ones of us won't make it. You look at the bird. The bird looks back. It's impossible to say who blinks first. Then comes training. The Lanista stands in the center of the yard, arms folded, radiating the sort of calm menace that suggests he could end a man's career with a single eyebrow. "Today," he announces, "we separate the potential champions from the inevitable casualties. If you don't know which you don't worry, we'll find out soon enough. You are handed a new sword, not wooden this time, metal though dulled at the edges, the kind of dullness that still looks perfectly capable of ending a conversation permanently. Your helmet remains the same, still smelling faintly of dairy and regret. The veterans line up opposite the recruits. One of them, a scarred man with arms like marble statues, cracks his neck and grins. "Try not to cry this time," he says, presumably to everyone. The recruits shift nervously. Someone mutters a prayer to Mars. Someone else asks if there's still time to transfer to the Navy. "Pair off," shouts the Lanista. "Learn to strike, learn to block, and if you must bleed, do it neatly." You end up paired with Brutus, which initially feels like a stroke of good luck until you remember that he is approximately the size of a small amphitheater. "Don't worry," he says, twirling his wooden practice sword like a man who's entirely too comfortable with violence. "I'll go easy on you." He does not. Within seconds, your arm is vibrating from the impact of a parry gone wrong, your feet are sliding in the sand, and you're developing a newfound respect for how much dirt one can inhale before passing out. Brutus laughs cheerfully between strikes. "Good, you're learning," he says, moments before knocking your sword out of your hand. The Lanista walks by, eyes narrowing. "What's this?" he asks, pointing at you. "Training, sir," you manage to say. "It looks more like surrender with enthusiasm," he replies. "Pick it up, again." So you pick it up, again and again, until your fingers feel like someone else's and your sword arm trembles like a leaf in a strong wind. Somewhere behind you, the cooking pot man is spinning in circles, shouting, "Is this part of it?" which earns him a swift trip to the ground. By midday, the air is thick with dust and despair. The recruits are coated in sweat and sand, moving, like a pack of disgruntled ghosts. The Lanista paces between you all, shouting things like "posture" and "commit to your strikes," and occasionally, "Stop crying, it's unbecoming." When the horn finally sounds for a break, you collapse beside Brutus under a patch of shade that might generously be described as symbolic. He hands you a flask of water, which you accept as though it's the elixir of life. "Not bad," he says. "You've still got both ears. That's more than most manage on day 2. You stare at him. "How many days have you done this?" He squints into the distance. "Hard to say. I stopped counting when I realized no one was giving out medals. The afternoon brings something the Lanista calls conditioning. It involves carrying heavy stones across the yard, swinging wooden swords at invisible enemies, and running laps until you begin to suspect time itself has stopped. The sun beats down, merciless and smug. Sweat drips into your eyes, your arms ache, and every grain of sand seems personally invested in sticking to your skin. Faster, the lanista shouts. The crowd won't cheer for exhaustion. You don't have the breath to point out that the crowd probably won't cheer for you at all. At one point, you trip, sprawling face first into the sand. You lie there for a moment, considering simply staying down. The ground, after all, is soft and warm, and if you close your eyes, you can almost imagine you're on a beach, not a death preparation facility. Brutus's voice cuts through the haze. Up! Don't let him see you resting. He calls that selective weakness. You don't want to know what the treatment for that is. You get up. You always get up. By evening, the lanista deems you sufficiently humiliated for one day. Clean up, he orders. Dinner, then rest. Tomorrow we learn to die with precision. The bathhouse, to your mild surprise, is the nicest part of the ludus. Steam curls from stone pools filled with warm, murky water. The smell of oil and herbs drifts in the air, lavender perhaps, or something that at least once met lavender. You sink into the water, every muscle sighing in relief. Around you, men scrub, talk, and compare bruises as if they're trading cards. Brutus settles into the pool beside you, grinning. So, he says, what do you think so far? You glance at him. About what? This whole life of glory, honor and mild head trauma. You consider your answer. It's not quite as advertised, he laughs. You'll see. Once you've survived your first real bout, everything changes. You get better food, more respect, sometimes even your own towel. Tempting, you say. He nods sagely. Besides, you're doing well. You haven't run away yet. That's something. You raise an eyebrow. People run away. Oh yes, not far though. Usually just to the gate before the guards remind them that enthusiasm doesn't outrun iron bars. After the bath, dinner is served, a generous term for a ladle of stew and a chunk of bread that could be classified as a weapon. You eat anyway, because hunger in the ludus is less of an emotion and more of a religion. The men talk quietly, sharing stories of their past lives. One claims to have been a farmer before being recruited. Another insists he was once a poet, though no one believes him because he still has all his teeth. Brutus, between mouthfuls, tells you about his homeland, green hills, cold rivers, and a tribe that believed strength came from laughter. You suspect that belief has been tested extensively. As night falls, the torches flicker and the courtyard settles into uneasy quiet. The stars above Rome are faint, washed out by smoke and ambition. You lie on your cot, sore but oddly awake, thinking about the strange logic of your new existence. In the ludus, success isn't about glory or even victory. It's about not dying, or at least dying later than everyone else. The next morning, the horn sounds again. Your body protests, but your feet obey. The sun hasn't even risen fully, yet already the air feels heavy with heat and expectation. Today's lesson, the lanista announces, is teamwork. The word hangs in the air like a bad omen. You will fight in pairs, he explains. One defends, one attacks. Learn to trust your partner. Your life may depend on it. You're paired once again with Brutus. He grins. Don't worry. I'm an excellent teammate. I've only accidentally maimed 3 partners. Only 3, you ask. That I know of. The exercise begins. You're meant to move in tandem, blocking and striking as if you share a single mind. What actually happens is that you and Brutus move in opposite directions, hit each other's shields, and fall over in synchrony. The lanista sighs deeply, as though witnessing art being defaced. You fight, he says, like 2 chickens sharing a helmet. He makes you start again, and again, until you begin to sense the rhythm, Brutus's movements, his timing, the way he feints and pivots. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin to adapt. You start to anticipate, and once, just once, you actually land a hit on him. He freezes, blinking in disbelief. Then he smiles, wide and proud. Ha! You see? You're learning. Now do that again, only deliberately. By the end of the session, your arms are leaden, Your lungs are fire, and you've earned a few new bruises in places you didn't know could bruise. But something inside you feels different, a small stubborn spark that refuses to go out. That evening, as you sit in the fading light, Brutus claps you on the shoulder. "You'll make it," he says. "You've got the right spirit." Terrified, obedient, and too confused to quit. You laugh, mostly because it hurts too much not to. Around you, the ludus hums with weary life, the clatter of armor, the murmur of exhausted men, the distant bark of the lanista scolding someone for existing too loudly. You think back on the day, the blows, the sweat, the absurdity of learning how to almost not die, and realize that somehow, in the midst of it all, you're still here, still standing, still breathing, and in this strange sun-baked corner of Rome, that counts as progress. Evenings in the ludus arrive with a peculiar sense of inevitability, like taxes or bad weather, except slightly less painful than both. The sun lowers itself reluctantly behind the stone walls, brushing the courtyard with a tired orange glow, as if apologizing for its previous aggression. You rise from your cot, every joint issuing formal complaints, and make your way to the open courtyard. Sand clings stubbornly to your bare feet, as though it has claimed you as its property. And judging by the events of the day, you suppose it has. Around you, men are settling into a strange rhythm that seems to define life in the ludus. Some sit cross-legged on the ground, examining their injuries with the same meticulous care as a scholar reviewing a manuscript, while others pace back and forth, adjusting their armor or muttering incantations to gods whose favor they are increasingly unsure of. Brutus intercepts you with a grin that is entirely too calm given the circumstances. "Evenings are oddly pleasant," he observes, "at least for those who can still sit without collapsing." You follow him toward a low stone bench where a few others have gathered. Food has arrived, though food is a word that here requires generous interpretation. Loaves of bread, the type so dry it could probably serve as projectile weaponry, rest alongside bowls of stew that slosh slowly, thick with barley, beans, and mysterious lumps that might once have had names. A jug of water sits nearby, and a small, suspiciously diluted wine is offered to the veterans. You naturally are too new to receive anything beyond what falls from someone else's table. You accept your share gratefully, mindful that in this environment, scraps are currency, and complaining is considered a personal failing. As you sit and eat, you begin to observe the subtle social hierarchies of the ludus. Veterans command deference. Without asking, their posture relaxed but unmistakably commanding. Their laughter is measured, their smiles infrequent but effective, and their portions always slightly larger. You notice, too, that they have an uncanny ability to glance toward the lanista and communicate entire sentences without speaking. A raised eyebrow, a shift of weight, a subtle flick of a hand conveys, "Don't waste my time," with precision. That leaves you in awe. The rookies, by contrast, shuffle nervously, sharing whatever has dribbled from the veterans' tables. You join them quietly, keeping your head down and your portion intact, which is challenging because the stew is thicker than some mortar you've seen, and the bread tastes faintly of despair. One of the rookies tries to engage you in conversation, but quickly abandons the attempt when a veteran mutters a threat about being too loud and very edible. Brutus leans in and whispers conspiratorially. "Hierarchy is everything here," he explains. "Observe, imitate, survive. They get wine, we get crumbs, but in 3 years you'll be the one getting wine. Assuming survival, obviously." You nod, though you're beginning to suspect that 3 years may be more metaphorical than literal. After the meal, the atmosphere begins to shift. The men start clearing space in the courtyard, and the inevitable dice game is organized. A plank of wood rests atop 2 overturned crates, serving as a table, and a ragged collection of dice is brought out, each one more pitted and chipped than the last. The stakes are explained in a mixture of gestures, grunts, and half-understood Latin. Coins change hands, laughter erupts, and occasionally, a scolding comes from a veteran when someone rolls poorly. Brutus leans over your shoulder. "Mostly money," he says. But emotional support counts too. You'll learn which is which. The game begins. Dice tumble, clatter, and sometimes slide off the table entirely. A veteran grins wickedly as he shakes the dice in a cup that has seen better centuries. "Ah," he says, "the rookie's first taste of chaos with consequences." You try to pay attention, trying to grasp the rules, but soon realize that the system is far more complicated than it needs to be, or perhaps just designed to make you feel like an incompetent idiot. Both possibilities seem equally likely. Despite your initial confusion, the game has a curious effect. You notice bonds forming quietly, small nods of recognition, inside jokes whispered over the dice, a gentle teasing that carries no malice. You begin to see that even in a place defined by sand, bruises, and occasional death threats, there is room for friendship. Brutus rolls a winning number and laughs, slapping you on the back in congratulations. The force is enough to rattle few teeth loose, but the sentiment is appreciated. Eventually, someone begins to sing. The voice is rough but resolute, and it carries across the courtyard like a war drum of absurdity. Technically, it is a battle hymn, though the lyrics concern bread more than blood, the proper kneading, baking, and theft of it from one's bunkmate. The men around him join in, some harmonizing, some muttering only half coherently, creating a chorus that is part camaraderie, part ritual, and part desperate therapy. You find yourself humming along quietly, amazed at humanity's ability to produce art under duress. Even here, surrounded by impending death and recurring humiliation, music thrives. Between songs, stories are shared. One veteran recounts an encounter with a particularly surly boar, describing the event with such detail and bravado that you can almost smell the mud and hear the squealing. Another speaks of a narrowly avoided collapse of scaffolding in the arena, a tale filled with precarious balance and shouting, and the men listen, rapt, because it is both entertaining and a subtle warning. You are captivated despite yourself, noting how vividly the anecdotes paint a picture of life in this strange, sun-baked world. Brutus leans close and whispers that the real social currency isn't bread, wine, or dice. It's stories. The more amusing or harrowing your tale, the more respect you garner, even if your story involves tripping over your own feet while being struck by your own sword. The laughter of your peers becomes a form of survival. Even mistakes are celebrated, provided they are sufficiently entertaining. The evening stretches on. Men walk between the courtyard and the sleeping quarters, carrying water, oil, and the occasional fragment of an argument. You begin to notice subtle gestures, a veteran passing an extra piece of bread to a rookie who looked particularly miserable, a nod to someone struggling with a sword form, a whispered joke that elicits a grin so fleeting you almost question whether it happened. It is in these small actions you realize that the true social structure of the ludus reveals itself, a network of observation, assistance, and quiet judgment, all wrapped in sand and muscle. A faint breeze stirs, carrying with it the sense of oil lamps, sweat, and stone heated by the day. You inhale deeply, noting that even unpleasant smells have a way of marking time and space. They are the signature of this world, a sensory map that tells you where danger is, where comfort is, and where, at least temporarily, human kindness persists. By now, the dice game has wound down. Coins are redistributed, grudges softly assigned, and someone, probably the cooking pot man, is muttering about cheating. You shrug and sip water, feeling slightly more confident in your ability to interpret this strange society. You watch the veterans, noticing how they interact with the rookies. Some patience, some mockery, and always a subtle lesson in how to survive another day. Stories continue, interrupted occasionally by the clang of a dropped cup or the bark of a distant command. Men argue over strategy, insult each other's technique, and laugh in the way that only people who have narrowly avoided death can. You realize that in the ludus, friendship is built not on comfort or similarity, but on shared vulnerability, shared hardship, and shared absurdity. Eventually, the singing resumes, and someone begins a second verse about bread that is more enthusiastic than technically accurate. It is met with cheering and mock-solemn nods. You lean back, allowing the warmth of the fire and the absurdity of it all to wash over you. Even amidst bruises, dust, and the lingering threat of sudden combat, you feel a peculiar comfort. The men here, flawed as they are, have found a way to connect, to laugh, and to survive together. As night descends fully, torches cast flickering shadows across the sand. The courtyard quiets, though soft laughter and murmured conversations continue in the background. You retreat to the dormitory, brushing sand from your tunic and trying not to think about the early morning horn that will inevitably sound. Brutus flops onto his cot beside yours with a sigh of contentment, the kind that only comes after long days of exertion, shared risk, and inexplicable camaraderie. "Not so bad, eh?" he says, stretching his arms. "The social life of the doomed, as I call it." You lie back listening to the soft murmurs of men around you, the occasional cough, and the faint rhythm of the distant horn. Somewhere above, a bird caws, a reminder that life outside the ludus still exists, but for now this enclosed, sand-covered, absurd little world is your reality. You think about what Brutus said, about humans finding friendship even in the strangest circumstances, and you realize he's right. Even here, amidst the sweat, bruises, and constant threat of injury, people make connections. They tell stories, share bread, and even sing songs about it. You close your eyes on your straw bed, the smell of oil and sweat thick in the air, and allow a faint smile to touch your face. Somewhere in the chaos, in the absurdity, and in the bruising monotony of survival, you have begun to understand. Social life is as essential to survival as skill with a sword, and camaraderie can be the quietest, strongest weapon of all. You drift into sleep, not peaceful, not entirely safe, but surrounded by men who, in their own peculiar ways, are watching out for each other. And in a world designed to break you, that is a luxury almost worth every splinter, every bruise, and every mouthful of stale bread. Bath day arrives with the kind of quiet menace only a Roman schedule can produce. You are awakened not by gentle sunlight or the chirping of birds, but by the familiar blast of the horn and the shouts of men already marching toward their inevitable fate. Brutus appears in the doorway of the dormitory, towel slung over his shoulder, grinning with the sort of enthusiasm that is unnerving at 6 in the morning. "Bath day," he announces. "Time to scrub off the day and add a layer of new humiliation." You follow him, feet scraping across sand and dust, aware that soon every inch of your body will be exposed to judgment, gossip, and soap you didn't ask for. The route to the communal baths is a parade of dread. You pass through corridors lined with stone walls and scattered puddles of water, leftover oil and who knows what else. The sound of voices drifts through the halls, overlapping like a poorly rehearsed choir. Some voices are shouting, some are singing, and one, unmistakably, is laughing at a joke you do not understand. Brutus nudges you forward. "Just nod wisely," he says. "They appreciate subtlety." You enter the baths and are immediately hit with a wall of steam so dense it could be considered a solid substance. The air smells strongly of olive oil, herbs, and centuries of accumulated ambition. The pools glisten in the dim torchlight, each one steaming and rippling as men of varying sizes and confidence levels move with the grace of someone entirely unconcerned with modesty. This is the Roman spa experience, which is less about relaxation and more about confronting human anatomy in its most assertive form. As you step closer to the water, you notice the social stratification is as evident here as it is in the ludus. The veterans occupy the prime spots near the hottest water, lounging with the ease of men who have earned their comfort through skill, intimidation, and a general disregard for the safety of rookies. They are sprawled across the edges, dipping their toes, arms, or entire bodies into the steaming pools with a confidence that is at once enviable and vaguely terrifying. Rookies cluster near the cooler edges, whispering and avoiding eye contact. You position yourself among them, trying your best to look casual while your skin prickles with self-consciousness. The first challenge is simply existing without drawing unwanted attention. You lower yourself into the water cautiously, wincing, as the heat envelops your muscles, melting some of the stiffness accumulated from yesterday's training. The sensation is simultaneously soothing and mildly terrifying, like stepping into a sauna while being observed by judges with cruel intentions. Around you, conversation unfolds with astonishing energy. Men gossip about politics, although it's hard to tell whether they are discussing actual law or just debating the latest circus spectacle. "Did you see the Senate vote on grain distribution?" one asks, voice carrying across the steam. Another scoffs. "Grain distribution? They can't even distribute sandals properly. I don't care about the Senate. What I want to know is who took my sponge." Chariot traffic is another topic of contention. "Rome is congested," someone complains, shaking a finger, "and you cannot pass without some senator's carriage nearly decapitating you. I told the prefect to build a roundabout, but no. Tradition." Another man counters with a story about nearly tipping his own trireme over in protest, which somehow earns him laughter and sympathetic nods. You nod along wisely at these discussions, unsure of which city problems are genuine, which are exaggerated, and which are entirely allegorical. The art of oiling weapons and tridents becomes a heated debate. In one corner, a small group leans over a wooden bench, trading techniques and arguing about whether a trident should receive more oil on the tines or the handle. You watch silently, nodding as instructed. "Interesting," you murmur once, and someone smiles at you, assuming that your silence signals deep wisdom. You feel vaguely guilty for bluffing so convincingly, but it is clear that survival in this environment requires diplomacy and strategic ambiguity. As you adjust to the heat, the smell, and the occasional splash of water from an over-enthusiastic veteran, you find yourself gradually acclimating. The steam seems less oppressive, the air less hostile, and you even begin to appreciate the rhythm of communal nudity, though naturally you draw careful boundaries for yourself. Everyone seems deeply confident, or perhaps entirely unconcerned, about personal modesty. The size, shape, and musculature of your peers are laid bare, often complemented by loud laughter, mock boasting, or philosophical musings about soap efficacy. Then comes the awkward moment, the inevitable collision of your rookie status with someone else's enthusiasm. A man with an imposing beard and eyes that have seen too much bathhouse politics mistakes, your pale, slightly sunburned skin for marble. He leans forward, inspecting your arms as though you were a statue newly carved from the quarries of Carrara. "Ah, the sculptor has done excellent work," he exclaims. "The veins, the form, exquisite. Who is your master?" You pause, momentarily stunned, your brain attempting to reconcile the fact that you are, at this moment, being complimented as a work of art, while also being acutely aware that you are sweating, sore, and sand-streaked from 2 days of relentless training. "Thank you," you manage, nodding as if this were the most natural thing in the world. He beams and moves along, clearly satisfied with his contribution to the world of Roman aesthetics. You return to your cautious submersion, observing the social dance around you. Men pass oils and scrapers with the precision of a military formation. Yet the chaos is ever present. Arguments flare over whose turn it is to scrape the benches. Someone drops a jug of water, and the splash lands on the only person brave enough to sit fully upright in the hottest pool. He yelps, splashing back, and a chain reaction of minor eruptions follows. You are soaked, but uninjured, which is a small victory. Conversations drift to past battles, the kind of stories that make your spine shiver even in the comforting steam. One man recounts a lion encounter in Africa, describing teeth, claws, and sheer terror with a meticulous eye for detail. Another insists he once survived a boar charge while carrying an entire amphora of wine, an anecdote that earns him applause, laughter, and at least one dubious look from the Trident Oiling Committee. You nod politely at each tale, wondering how some men manage to survive long enough to tell stories, and how some stories are clearly exaggerated to terrifying effect. Meanwhile, Brutus floats lazily nearby, arms draped over the edge of the pool, like a man entirely comfortable with life and its absurdities. "See," he says, "even here social hierarchy matters. Veterans claim the best seats and the warmest water. We rookies get the edges, the chill, and the unsolicited compliments." He grins, clearly proud of this insight. But look closely. There is strategy in everything. Who sits where, who laughs at whose jokes, who gets flung into the pool. Social survival is just as important as not being sliced by a sword. You take this advice to heart. You nod at conversations you do not understand, laugh at jokes whose punchlines escape you, and offer casual commentary where appropriate. Gradually you notice subtle acknowledgements from veterans, brief smiles, small nods, recognition that you are, in your own awkward way, beginning to integrate. The ludus is not just a place of physical survival, it is a social crucible, and tonight you are learning its rules. Hours pass in a haze of warmth, steam, and murmured conversation. You scrape the remaining oil from your skin, watch the water, ripple around you and note the soft glimmer of torchlight on damp stone. Somewhere above, night begins to settle over Rome, the city's distant sounds muted by the walls and the steam. In this enclosed, fragrant space, the absurdity of your existence is softened. Not eliminated, but rendered almost manageable by the shared humanity around you. By the time you leave the baths, dripping and slightly less tense, you feel, strangely, lighter. Perhaps it is the heat, perhaps the socialization, or perhaps the subtle magic of a place where men can gossip, argue, and admire each other's marble-like skin without consequence. Brutus wraps a towel around his waist, claps you on the shoulder, and grins. See, not so bad. Romans know how to socialize. You learn more here than in training, and you don't even risk a sprained ankle. You follow him back to the dormitory, wet footprints marking your path across stone floors. Somewhere along the way, a veteran critiques the efficiency of your towel folding technique. You nod, smile, and vow internally that next time you will at least try to fold it in a manner that meets Roman standards. As night falls, the ludus quiets, though soft laughter, muted conversation, and the occasional splash from someone still practicing a ritualistic dunk linger in the air. You lie on your straw bed, muscles still warm, skin faintly scented with olive oil, and to reflect on the day. Bath day is more than hygiene. It is a social gauntlet, a political arena, and occasionally a comedy stage all rolled into one. Somewhere in the darkness, Brutus chuckles at a memory of the marble compliment, and you smile, faintly. Perhaps tomorrow will bring sword practice, bruises, and exhaustion. But tonight, at least, you have survived the steam, the gossip, the nudity, and the subtle politics of the Roman spa. And in this absurd, sun-baked, dangerously confident little world, that counts as a small, unexpected victory. Evenings in the ludus are often a mixture of fatigue, reflection, and the lingering aroma of sweat, oil, and sand. But one particular evening arrives with a subtle novelty. You are walking back from the communal baths, still feeling slightly smug that you managed to navigate the social politics of naked, steamy men without tripping or offending anyone, when you notice a figure leaning against the wall of the courtyard. His posture is calm, almost meditative, a marked contrast to the usual frenetic energy of the ludus. This is Lysander, a Greek trainee whose reputation precedes him. Whispers in the dormitory speak of him as the philosopher, though you suspect it is more for the way he talks than for any official title. He turns to you with a serene smile. "Ah," he says, voice smooth like warm honey poured over stone. "So you seem present." You blink, unsure how to respond. Present. You are perpetually exhausted, sore in every muscle and vaguely terrified. Presence feels like a distant luxury, as far away as a hot bath with no one shouting about tridents. Yes, present, you manage, nodding cautiously. "Good," Lysander replies, gesturing toward the courtyard. "Come, sit. The night is patient and the universe is generous with its lessons if one knows how to observe it." You sit, mostly because he seems unlikely to allow refusal. The courtyard is quiet, torches flickering and casting shadows across the sand, and for the first time in days the ludus feels almost contemplative rather than relentlessly punitive. You glance around, half expecting someone to intervene with a reminder that a sword can be deadly, but no one approaches. Lysander is calm, immovable, the eye of a storm you are still too exhausted to perceive fully. "I have been thinking," he begins, about the nature of gladiatorial combat. You see, it is not merely the art of striking, blocking, or enduring. It is a metaphor for life, for the human condition itself. Each engagement, each parry, each scrape of a blade against another is a reflection of our inner struggles. You stare at him. Not because his words are confusing, though they are, but because he speaks them with such calm conviction that it momentarily disarms your natural skepticism. The absurdity of gladiatorial combat being a metaphor for anything, let alone the human condition, does not strike you as particularly comforting. And yet you remain listening. Consider fear, Lysander continues. Fear is both a companion and an adversary. It can paralyze, but it can also awaken awareness. One must learn to observe it, to welcome it as a guide rather than a tyrant. You nod, though inwardly you are mostly thinking about the last time a veteran's wooden sword nearly decapitated you. Somehow, though, his words ease a tension in your chest. It is the sort of calm that seems almost illicit, like a stolen moment of sanity in a world designed to break you physically and psychologically. And fate, Lysander adds, tilting his head toward the stars beginning to peek above the walls, is neither cruel nor kind. It simply is. One may rail against it, weep before it, or attempt to cheat it, but in the end, understanding it brings a measure of peace. You take a deep breath, realizing that your lungs still smell faintly of bathhouse oil and toasted bread, and you marvel at the strange contrast between Lysander's serene wisdom and the bruised, chaotic reality of your daily existence. And olive oil, he continues, eyes narrowing slightly, is not merely a culinary delight. It is the elixir of life, the medium through which one nurtures body and soul. One must ask, does it count as moisturizer? Yes, certainly. It is more than moisturizer. It is philosophy you can apply directly to your epidermis. You laugh quietly, the sound startlingly loud in the sudden calm. I never thought of it that way, you admit. He smiles. Many truths are hidden in plain sight, often under the guise of mundane necessity. The application of olive oil, the rhythm of breath, the positioning of the body in anticipation of a strike, all are lessons if one has the patience to observe. Then he demonstrates a breathing exercise. Sitting cross-legged, he inhales deeply, filling his lungs as if drawing not only air but the wisdom of the cosmos into himself. He holds it, counts to an arbitrary number and exhales slowly, deliberately, as if releasing not only breath but all anxiety. You see, he says, this is the art of preparation. Before combat, before life, one must breathe. Observe the mind, calm the body, align intention with action. You attempt the exercise, inhaling, holding and exhaling with the precision of someone half convinced it will either make you enlightened or pass out entirely. You feel slightly ridiculous, yet oddly soothed. The motion does not remove fear, fatigue or soreness, but it organizes them into something that resembles focus. Good, Lysander remarks, noticing your effort. The first lesson of combat is not the sword, it is the breath. Control it, and you may survive. Lose it, and the sword will control you. You nod again, wondering how much of this lesson will survive the next sparring session, when wooden swords and bruised ribs will demand immediate attention. Nevertheless, the calmness is a welcome reprieve. You feel a small sense of mastery, even if it is only over your own lungs and tremors. The conversation drifts naturally into philosophy, as conversations with Lysander do. He discusses courage, the illusion of control, and the subtle ways humans find meaning even in the most absurd circumstances. You are fascinated, mostly because you are so exhausted that pondering your own mortality through metaphor seems preferable to actual physical exertion. He asks questions. What is fear? What is honor? Can suffering teach or merely punish? You attempt answers, fumbling through thoughts that feel both shallow and profound, like trying to describe the taste of water with words. Time seems to slow. Somewhere beyond the walls, distant laughter and shouting drift faintly through the night. But here, in this small courtyard, the world narrows to Lysander, your breathing, and the faint sparkle of torchlight on sand. You notice how the exertion of the day, bruised muscles, aching joints, and the faint soreness in your ribs has prepared your mind to receive his words. Perhaps enlightenment can be achieved not through meditation alone, but through exhaustion, through exposure, through being thoroughly beaten both physically and mentally until clarity sneaks in through the cracks. You are learning quickly, Lysander says after a pause, not merely the techniques, but observation, patience, and restraint. These are the true weapons of a gladiator. You consider this, true weapons, the sword, the shield, the block, the parry, they are all obvious. But restraint, awareness, patience, these are invisible, intangible, and perhaps far more dangerous to your opponents than any sharp edge. You breathe in again, holding it, letting the realization sink into your chest. Tell me, he adds, suddenly tilting his head, do you believe one may find clarity in combat? Not victory nor fame, but understanding. You pause, fingers flexing unconsciously, recalling yesterday's bruises, the absurdity of dice games, and the philosophical musings of veterans and rookies alike. Perhaps, you say cautiously, if exhaustion allows for reflection, then maybe. He nods approvingly. Exhaustion is a teacher. Pain, fear, absurdity, all teachers. One must observe and accept the lessons. Then he smiles, as if amused by his own profundity. And when in doubt, remember the olive oil. You laugh again, quieter this time, a sound mingled with relief and lingering fatigue. The conversation drifts back to lighter topics, the relative effectiveness of various sword stances, the difference between fear and panic, and whether certain ointments actually improve agility or are merely superstition. You follow along, nodding, where appropriate, occasionally asking questions whose answers elude even Lysander. By the time the night is fully descended over the ludus, you feel a strange sense of peace. Your body remains sore, your limbs are heavy, and the faint twinge of fear for tomorrow's training persists, but your mind is uncharacteristically calm. Lysander's lessons have provided a space to reflect, a moment of clarity amid chaos. Perhaps you think the true value of a philosopher in a gladiator's world is not in teaching technique, but in teaching perspective. He rises gracefully, as if his energy is inexhaustible, and pats your shoulder lightly. Remember, the sword is nothing without the mind, and the mind is tempered by breath, observation, and occasionally laughter. Until tomorrow, my friend. You watch him walk away, disappearing into the shadows of the dormitory. You sit for a while longer, alone now, breathing deeply, replaying his words in your mind. The courtyard feels less threatening, the torches less harsh, and for the first time you entertain the faint notion that survival in the ludus might include more than physical endurance. Perhaps, somewhere between exhaustion and absurdity, there is wisdom to be gained. Eventually you rise and return to your cot, muscles complaining softly but your mind curiously alert. You lie down, reflecting on the night's conversation, on fear, fate, and olive oil, and on the curious possibility that enlightenment might indeed be achieved through sheer, unrelenting exhaustion. Somewhere in the distance, a man snores. Somewhere, closer, Brutus shifts, muttering in his sleep. And somewhere in your own chest, a tiny spark of understanding flickers, quiet, absurd, and infinitely precious. The morning arrives with all the subtlety of a war drum, or more accurately, a war drum combined with the blaring insistence of several hundred trumpets and the occasional shout from your fellow gladiators, reminding you that death is imminent and public embarrassment inevitable. You wake in your straw-filled cot, the mattress lumpy, your limbs sore, and a faint sense of impending doom lodged firmly in your stomach. Today is the day of reckoning, the day when spectators will judge your competence, or lack thereof, with screaming enthusiasm, and maybe a few thrown coins. You stumble to your feet, ignoring protests from every joint in your body, and wonder briefly whether it is socially acceptable to vomit before entering the arena, or whether it would be preferable to wait until you are surrounded by thousands of spectators and a faintly terrifying smell of cooked meat. Brutus, still, half asleep, slaps you on the back with a grin. Best to save it, he mutters. They love drama, not pre-game nausea. You nod, appreciating the guidance, though you are not entirely convinced it will be enough to prevent an embarrassing incident. The walk to the Colosseum is surreal. The sun is low, golden, and already lighting the dust in a way that makes the massive structure look almost ethereal, as if the arena itself were a celestial stage designed to dramatize every misstep. The distant smell of roasting sausages wafts through the morning air, mingling with the earthy scent of sand and sweat. You breathe it in, wondering if survival in the arena might be, in part, a matter of nose training, detecting edible distractions. Amidst chaos, the gates open, revealing the arena in its full glory. It is larger than any vision you've previously attempted, more imposing than your imagination had allowed. Sand stretches out before you, golden and uneven, glinting faintly in the light. Dust swirls lazily around the edges, catching the sunlight, like miniature stars in a confined sky. The stands rise steeply, a living wall of anticipation, each seat filled with people eager to witness either skill, spectacle, or your inevitable misfortune. Trumpets blare, a sharp, commanding sound that vibrates through your chest, and somewhere someone shouts a name you cannot possibly recognize. Your palms are damp, and your stomach is doing somersaults that may or may not be unrelated to your fear. You are paired with Titus, the mildly terrifying, a veteran whose reputation precedes him in every whispered conversation, every sideways glance, and every nervous nod of the rookies. Titus is large, muscled, and calm in a way that is unnerving. He doesn't speak much, but when he does, it is with the kind of economy that suggests you will either survive this pairing or become an anecdote in someone else's story. You exchange a nod. He raises his wooden sword, and you mirror the gesture with your own, though yours wobbles slightly in the heat of nervous anticipation. The rules, such as they exist, are simple. Fight convincingly, avoid actual death if possible, and make the audience cheer. You step into the sand, and the crowd responds with a roar that rattles your teeth and makes your ears ring pleasantly. Somehow the noise is exhilarating, terrifying, and absurdly funny all at once. You wonder whether anyone in the audience will notice if you collapse dramatically before engaging in any combat, but decide against it. Discretion is perhaps the better part of valor. The fight begins with a flourish of wooden swords and a cautious approach. You circle, eyes darting, trying to remember Lysander's breathing exercises, Brutus's advice, and the vague notion that the goal is to appear competent. Titus moves with the precision of someone entirely familiar with this environment, his strikes measured, his blocks elegant. You respond with all the bravery you can summon, which at the moment is roughly equal to the panicked flailing of a slightly confused swan. Minutes pass. You block, parry, and occasionally overcommit, wobbling dangerously, and every now and then. Then you accidentally graze him with your wooden sword. Titus pretends to be impressed, and you pretend that you intended to strike with precision all along. The crowd cheers at every exchange, delighted by the apparent skill and drama, entirely unaware of your internal panic and desperate calculation of when to feign exhaustion. Somewhere in the midst of the chaos, your muscles begin to protest. Your lungs feel like they are filled with lead, your arms like overcooked spaghetti, and your mouth tastes faintly of dust and fear. You employ the breathing exercises Lysander taught you, though you are mostly using them to avoid passing out in full view of the Colosseum. You inhale, hold, exhale, and repeat, praying that your face maintains an expression of heroic competence rather than sheer terror. Titus nods once, as if approvingly, and strikes again, guiding the pace of the duel with a subtle precision that masks both his skill and your lack thereof. You respond, surprisingly, with movements that are mostly accurate, relying on muscle memory, adrenaline, and sheer luck. Every swing, every block, every feint becomes an elaborate dance, choreographed by fear and necessity, and somehow the crowd believes it is artistry rather than panic. The sun climbs higher, highlighting the sand, the swirling dust, and the occasional flash of sword. You notice details you had never appreciated before, the way light refracts off a polished helmet, the subtle shifts of shadow that signal an incoming strike, the distant scent of roasted meat mingling with the salty tang of sweat and dust. The arena is alive, almost sentient, observing, evaluating, and judging every movement with a merciless yet strangely encouraging energy. Time becomes slippery. Minutes stretch and compress simultaneously. You swing, block, pivot, and occasionally stumble. Aware that audience members are cheering, shouting, and perhaps wagering on your performance, you fight not just with your body, but with a kind of theatrical bravado, each movement carefully calibrated to convey competence, courage, and the faintest hint of flair. Eventually, exhaustion overtakes precision. You and Titus collide in the center of the arena, swords clattering against each other with a resonant clang that echoes through the stands. For several tense moments, you are locked in a tableau of mutual fatigue, chests heaving, sweat dripping into eyes, muscles trembling. With the exertion of prolonged display, the crowd responds with raucous approval, mistaking mutual collapse for heroic drama. You sink to your knees and then into the sand, breathing heavily, arms trembling, but grinning inwardly, because the audience has no idea how close this is to genuine disaster. Titus lies beside you, chest rising and falling, and for a moment there is a shared understanding. Exhaustion is part of the performance, and you have both achieved it magnificently. The spectators erupt into cheers, clapping, stomping, and perhaps tossing a few coins into the sand, entirely unaware of how narrowly you avoided collapse under the weight of expectation. A herald steps forward, declaring both of you heroically competent. You blink. Heroically competent. That seems faintly inaccurate, considering your internal monologue throughout the fight involved multiple iterations of "do not fall over, do not faint, do not vomit in front of thousands." Nevertheless, the phrase is cheered, repeated, and celebrated. You bow, nodding to the audience, praying that your next performance involves slightly less collapse and marginally more coordination. The arena, now bathed in golden afternoon light, feels different. The swirling dust catches on your sweat-slicked skin. The distant scent of sausages remains tantalizingly close, and you are vaguely aware that the Colosseum itself seems to approve, perhaps in recognition of the courage it has observed, or perhaps simply amused by human persistence. You rise slowly, every joint creaking, every muscle complaining, and acknowledge the absurdity. You have survived the day of reckoning, impressed the crowd, and avoided actual decapitation. Titus pats your shoulder, offering the simplest form. A veteran acknowledgement, a silent nod, a flicker of approval in his eyes. You realize, with some relief, that your efforts, fumbling, panicked, partially heroic, have produced a result that matters in this world. Survival is not only about skill with a sword, it is also about endurance, spectacle, and the uncanny ability to appear competent when your body is screaming otherwise. As you leave the arena, shoulders slick with sweat, sand clinging in every crevice, and muscles trembling, you allow yourself a small sense of triumph. The Colosseum still echoes with the cheers of thousands. The smell of roasted meat lingers in the warm air, and the golden light bathes the sand in a glow that seems almost approving. You are heroically competent. You survived. And in this absurdly theatrical, brutally exhausting world, that counts as a victory. Perhaps not a flawless victory, not an elegant one, but a victory nonetheless. Returning to the ludus, every step is measured, each one a testament to endurance over elegance. Brutus meets you at the entrance, raising a brow. "Well," he asks, "survived without vomiting? Impressive." You nod, though you suspect that in the grand narrative of gladiatorial, your particular contribution will be remembered primarily for exhaustion, sweat, and heroic blunders disguised as technique. By evening, you recline on your cot, body aching, limbs protesting, and mind buzzing from adrenaline, heat, and the faint perfume of roasted meat. You reflect on the day, the blare of trumpets, the roar of the crowd, the surreal beauty of golden sand and swirling dust, and the subtle terror of facing Titus, the mildly terrifying. Somehow, in the midst of chaos, fear, and sweat, you have found a moment of grace. A fleeting, absurd, sweaty grace, but grace nonetheless. Sleep comes eventually, filled with dreams of golden light, swirling sand, clashing swords, and an audience, forever cheering your name, not because you were flawless, but because you were heroically competent. The day after your debut in the arena arrives with a strange, disorienting energy. You awaken to the usual chorus of groans, creaks, and muffled complaints from fellow gladiators, only to find that everything feels subtly different. There is an almost tangible buzz in the air, a sensation you cannot immediately identify. As you swing your legs over the cot and stretch painfully, you notice a few of your fellow rookies giving you furtive glances, as if you are suddenly both a curiosity and a source of hope. You glance down at your bruised limbs and sweat-slicked torso, half expecting someone to point out that, despite appearances, nothing has changed, and yet apparently it has. Brutus appears at the doorway, towel thrown haphazardly over one shoulder, eyes alight with mischief and curiosity. "You've caught their attention," he says simply. "The merchants, the kids, even the Senate-adjacent types. You've become famous." You blink. Famous? You are a bruised, exhausted, and entirely bewildered gladiator who spent yesterday flailing convincingly with a wooden sword. Fame feels like something that should be reserved for poets, generals, or men who do not risk death on a daily basis. Nevertheless, Brutus's grin assures you it is real. Outside the ludus, the effects of this newfound notoriety become immediately apparent. Local merchants greet you warmly, offering discounts on ointments, oils, and oddly shaped fruit. "For the hero of yesterday," one says, bowing as he presents a selection of ointments promising healing, fortification, and apparently the ability to enhance one's bravery mid-fight. You nod, purchasing a small assortment, though you suspect the benefits are primarily psychological and possibly olfactory. Children, curious and undaunted, approach you with wax tablets and rudimentary styluses, asking for your autograph. You oblige, signing with the most heroic flourish your trembling hands can manage, all the while wondering if history will remember your signature or simply the faintly comedic wobble in your posture. The peak of this odd celebrity arrives in the form of a small banquet held in your honor. You enter the hall, sand still clinging to your armor, muscles protesting every step, and are greeted by a mixture of admiration, suspicion, and the faintly sour aroma of overcooked fowl. The tables are laden with roasted meats, bread, wine, and more olives than you thought biologically possible for one gathering. You are ushered to the seat of honor, which is more a matter of proximity to the trays than any formal acknowledgement of skill, but you accept it with humility, aware that you have not yet fully grasped the consequences of recognition. Conversation is a delicate minefield. You nod politely at introductions, smile where appropriate, and attempt to make small talk without betraying the fact that you are still recovering from yesterday's exertions. Somewhere across the hall, a senator, identified only by his excessive toga folds and the weighty severity of his gaze, approaches. You, exhausted, confused, and slightly overwhelmed, mistakenly assume he is a waiter offering wine. "Ah, yes," you exclaim, reaching for your goblet. "Thank you." The senator blinks, expression tightening imperceptibly, before retreating with what you later learn was barely suppressed indignation. You have, in one awkward gesture, insulted a man who wields considerable influence over grain distribution, taxes, and perhaps minor aspects of gladiatorial approval ratings. Brutus, sitting beside you, stifles a laugh with remarkable skill, eyes twinkling with both amusement and sympathy. As the banquet continues, you are showered with praise, gifts, and enthusiastic recitations of yesterday's exploits. Some of it is exaggerated, some entirely fabricated, and some disturbingly accurate in ways that make your muscles ache all over again just to remember the motions. You nod graciously, attempting to internalize compliments while simultaneously wondering how quickly one might recover from such relentless adulation without succumbing to either exhaustion or delusions of grandeur. You begin to suspect that fame, much like battle, is both fleeting and exhausting, a contagion that spreads from person to person, leaving mild chaos in its wake. It is in this heady, oil-scented atmosphere that you notice the first signs of a minor infection in your left shoulder, likely a souvenir from yesterday's exertions, and the less than sterile conditions of the arena. The irritation is subtle at first, a faint redness, a small swelling, a slight heat that prickles with every movement. You ignore it, Confident that ointments and the occasional glance in the mirror will suffice, Brutus advises caution, though his definition of caution includes applying an absurdly large quantity of olive oil while singing a tune about heroic incompetence. You follow suit, smearing the shoulder with a mixture of practical care and theatrical flair. As the evening progresses, conversation drifts to the nature of recognition. Veterans mutter about how yesterday's performance will be remembered in whispers, how stories evolve with every retelling, and how one's moment of glory is often as unpredictable as the sand in the arena. You nod thoughtfully, acknowledging that survival, quiet, uncelebrated and persistent, might ultimately be more valuable than fleeting applause. The crowd, meanwhile, continues to cheer intermittently, oblivious to your internal calculus of risk versus reward. Children continue to approach, now emboldened by their curiosity and your apparent accessibility. Wax tablets are presented with increasing frequency, and you find yourself signing multiple autographs, some with enthusiasm, some with mere compliance. Each signature is a small performance, a theatrical nod to your accidental fame, and a subtle reminder that even minor celebrity carries responsibilities. Attention, smiles, and the occasional bow. You observe your fellow gladiators, some of whom are less fortunate in the celebrity department, trading glances that range from envy to bemusement. One man attempts to mimic your heroic posture, only to trip over the edge of a rug and spill a goblet of wine across the floor. Laughter ensues, but you are aware that your own position is precarious. One misstep, one insult to the wrong senator, and your brief moment of recognition could evaporate entirely. The lesson is clear. Fame is fickle, absurd, and deeply exhausting. By the time the banquet winds down, you are physically tired, mildly feverish from the shoulder irritation, and mentally weary from the constant navigation of social niceties, inadvertent insults, and the expectations of both children and adults alike. Brutus leans toward you once more, offering the quiet reassurance that only someone who has survived multiple seasons of gladiatorial absurdity can provide. Remember, he says, it's not the applause that matters. It's staying alive, long enough to earn it again tomorrow. Fame is a visitor. Survival is a home. You nod, realizing that his words carry a strange, unexpected weight. Indeed, the applause, the merchandise, the wax tablets, the grateful merchants, and the startled senator, all of it is ephemeral. Your bruises, fatigue, and minor infections, however, are reminders that life, in its most immediate and stubborn form, continues regardless of public adoration. As you return to your dormitory, shoulders slick with sweat and olive oil, sand sticking in inconvenient places, you reflect on the curious nature of recognition. It is intoxicating, absurd, and mildly contagious, but fleeting. You begin to suspect that the quiet, ongoing struggle of survival, learning to navigate the arena, to endure training, to negotiate social hierarchies, might be the nobler pursuit, though it lacks the glamour of public acclaim. In the quiet hours before sleep, the lights of the city twinkle faintly through the open windows of the ludus. Children's voices echo faintly in your mind, still imagining you as a hero, while merchants' calls fade into distant murmurs. You touch your shoulder gingerly, considering the swelling, the heat, and the inevitability of ointment applications. You think of yesterday's fight, today's banquets, and the strange thrill of recognition. Fame has visited you briefly, like an overenthusiastic guest who leaves behind crumbs and minor injuries. Survival, you realize, remains steady, demanding, and ultimately more dependable. And so as your eyelids grow heavy and the world narrows to the dim shapes of straw-filled beds and snoring companions, you acknowledge the absurd, exhausting, and sometimes painful truth of gladiatorial existence. The applause may fade, the wax tablets may yellow, and the senators may still glare, but continuing to endure, to adapt, and to navigate the daily hazards of both body and reputation is a triumph in its own right. Fame is pleasant, infection is inconvenient, and survival, quietly persevering through every absurdity, remains the noblest pursuit of all. Weeks pass, each day a blur of training, combat, and absurd social lessons, until suddenly, almost imperceptibly, the ludus shifts. There is less shouting, fewer frantic instructions from the lanista, and remarkably, less expectation that you will collapse, faint, or accidentally set yourself on fire. One morning, a messenger arrives with a scroll, delivered with the sort of solemnity reserved for matters of grave importance. You unfurl it with hands that shake from long weeks of exertion and exhaustion, and read words that feel like sunlight, breaking through a storm cloud. You are offered freedom, or at the very least a sabbatical. You blink several times, attempting to reconcile this announcement with the bruised, sand-coated, slightly dehydrated version of yourself still standing. Freedom. The word tastes strange, almost alien on your tongue. You have dreamed of this moment in passing, while dodging wooden swords, navigating bathhouse politics, and tolerating the philosophical musings of Lysander. But now it is real. You are allowed to leave, to step beyond the walls of the ludus, beyond the sweat, the bruises, the absurdities of fame, into something quieter, slower, more deliberate. Packing is an exercise in minimalism. You gather your few belongings, a dented helmet, whose subtle chips and scratches narrate tales of near disasters and heroic incompetence. A half-eaten loaf of bread, a testament to your inconsistent eating habits and an ongoing fascination with sustenance as both necessity and minor indulgence. And finally, your dignity, in questionable condition, frayed at the edges, softened by repeated embarrassment, yet stubbornly intact in the places that truly matter. Each item is emblematic of your journey. Courage disguised as confusion, endurance disguised as panicked motion, and humor disguised as survival instinct. The march out of the ludus is strangely ceremonial. Brutus accompanies you, as if to ensure that your exit does not result in accidental tragedy or misplacement of critical items such as the half-eaten loaf. Veterans nod in passing, offering muted applause, silent respect, or the occasional raised eyebrow, an acknowledgement of your survival, even if achieved through a combination of luck, theatrical bravado, and strategic breathing. Somewhere, in the corner, Lysander whispers something about the philosophical implications of departure, but you are too focused on the wide world beyond the gates to fully parse his words. The city unfolds before you. Rome stretches in all directions, grand, chaotic, and exhaustingly magnificent. Marble arches rise in solemn grandeur, streets bustle with merchants hawking roasted chickpeas and pastries, and the distant roar of crowds echoes faintly from arenas, past, reminding you that spectacle is a constant in this place. You breathe it in, savoring the mixture of scents, dust, oil, roasted legumes, and faint traces of burned wood, and feel a sense of both liberation and disbelief. You, a former gladiator of questionable competence, are leaving the spectacle behind. Your departure is met with muted fanfare, largely because the city has seen thousands of gladiators come and go, but to you, each cheer, nod, or glance feels monumental. You ride through the streets atop a modest mount, every hoofbeat a rhythm marking a transition from chaos to calm. Children wave, merchants pause mid-sail, and distant senators glance your way with that unique combination of curiosity and mild disapproval that only the Roman elite can summon. You nod politely, acknowledging their attention while secretly feeling a thrill that fame, no matter how fleeting, has visited you one final time. The ride is contemplative. You pass familiar sights, the familiar arches of the Colosseum, a lingering trace of yesterday's glory. The markets where merchants once offered discounts and speculative advice, the baths still steaming, still bustling with men debating olive oil and philosophical minutiae. Each landmark evokes memory, humor, and occasional embarrassment, but collectively they form a tapestry of survival, a chronicle of bruises, absurdity, and improbable victories. Somewhere along the way, you resolve on a plan, one that is quietly revolutionary in its simplicity. You will buy an olive farm, somewhere distant enough to avoid the roar of crowds, the scent of roasted chickpeas in heavy quantities, and the occasional accidental stabbing, yet close enough to remember the lessons of Rome without succumbing entirely to nostalgia. You imagine rows of trees, sunlight glinting off silvery leaves, and the gentle rhythm of harvests rather than duels. You picture mornings filled with the subtle scent of soil and oil rather than blood and sand, and evenings where the loudest cheer is the call of a bird or the distant bray of a donkey. Packing your few belongings onto the modest cart that will carry you to this imagined sanctuary, you take stock of your journey. The dented helmet has survived, bearing scratches that speak to both hazard and heroism. The loaf of bread, slightly more stale but still edible, is a reminder of endurance. And your dignity, though frayed and fatigued, persists, a quiet, unspoken companion through all absurdities. Each item is a talisman, proof that you endured, laughed, and most importantly, survived. The journey out of the city is slow and deliberate. Dust rises in lazy spirals from the wheels of your cart, and the air carries the tang of fields beyond the city walls. Each mile feels like a small liberation, a shedding of tension, expectation, and the relentless need to appear heroically competent. You breathe deeply, savoring the taste of open air, free from the roar of the Colosseum, free from the overzealous applause of spectators, and free from the subtle threat of accidental insult to influential senators. The world beyond Rome is quieter, gentler and absurdly underwhelming in the best possible way. You imagine tending olive trees, pruning branches, and watching the silver-green leaves shimmer in the sun. Perhaps there will be minor injuries, the occasional thorn, a misjudged ladder, or an unfortunate encounter with a goat, but nothing compared to the danger, spectacle, and theatrical peril of the arena. You will cultivate olives, not chaos, tranquility, not terror, a rhythm dictated by seasons rather than applause. As you settle into this imagined existence, the absurdity of your journey strikes you. Fame, you realize, is fleeting. It arrives unexpectedly, often accompanied by minor insults, awkward gestures, or the occasional infection. Recognition is intoxicating but temporary. Survival, by contrast, is quietly heroic, persistent, and deeply satisfying in ways that applause cannot replicate. You smile faintly at the memory of yesterday's cheers, the laughter of Brutus, Lysander's calm philosophies, and the lingering smells of sand, oil, and roasted chickpeas. The narrator's voice softens, reflecting the gentle conclusion of a tumultuous chapter. You have survived the arena, the baths, the duels, and the fleeting absurdities of fame. You have endured, learned, and navigated a world designed to test body, mind, and dignity at every turn. And now, as the sun casts long shadows across rolling hills, you imagine a simpler life, sunlight warming the earth, olives hanging heavy on their branches, and a pace dictated by growth rather than spectacle. In this quiet reverie, the absurdity of glory fades, leaving only the faint, comforting rhythm of life continued. You drift through thoughts of vineyards, gentle breezes, and mornings unburdened by the imperative to fight, impress, or survive in front of thousands. No one yells, "Finish him," before breakfast. No trumpets blare. There are no judges, no dice games, no accidental insults to senators. Only the slow, measured cadence of sunlight, earth, and olive trees, punctuated occasionally by the distant bray of a goat or the hum of a bee. Your eyes grow heavy, the fatigue of weeks, months, and absurdity settling into your body. You imagine the smell of fresh soil mingling with olive oil, the distant song of a bird, and the faint rustle of leaves in a gentle wind. You inhale deeply, savoring freedom, warmth, and the remarkable quiet of survival. The Colosseum, the baths, the fights, and the brief spark of fame fade into memory, replaced by something gentler, steadier, and infinitely more comforting. And so, as your eyelids close, the narrative whispers its final acknowledgement. You have survived. You have seen the absurdity of glory, the fleeting nature of recognition, and the strange, sleepy peace of endurance. Somewhere beyond the city, under sun-dappled leaves, your life continues, quieter, slower, infinitely more yours. The sword is retired. The helmet, dented but loyal, rests on a shelf. The bread is eaten. And for the first time in a long while, the world feels safe, absurd and wonderfully yours. You drift off, imagining olive groves, the hum of life continued without spectacle, and a peace earned not through applause, but through persistence. Sunshine warms your back. The breeze carries the faintest scent of oil and earth, and in that quiet, sleepy moment, you realize that survival absurdity, and occasional laughter are perhaps all one truly needs to call life both complete and heroically. Quietly yours.